Some killers get life behind bars, others meet death before the sentence runs cold. Prison wasn't the end of their crimes. It was just where the nightmare changed hands. This is Grimvault, where we unearth the stories time tried to forget. These weren't just criminals. They were monsters, sadists, predators, and killers who believed steel doors and concrete walls would shield them from the world's wrath. But behind bars, the rules change. And justice doesn't always wear a badge. This is part one of a two-part descent into prison's darkest corners. Here, 20 of the world's most twisted murderers met their end, not by law, but at the hands of the very monsters they were locked in with. We begin with one of the most infamous names in modern crime. 1. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Monster. Jeffrey Dahmer thought prison was the end of his horror story. Instead, it was just a change of scenery. Between 1978 and 1991, he lured young men to his apartment, then drugged, dismembered, and, in some cases, cannibalized them. 15 convictions, life in Columbia Correctional. Prison doesn't separate monsters, it presses them tighter until they detonate. On November 28, 1994, while on janitor duty, Dahmer was attacked with a steel bar by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver. No warning, just a lock and a sock and a message: "Rats die hard." Scarver later said it was divine justice. The system called it routine violence. Dahmer, who turned silence into terror, died hearing his own skull fracture. 2. Billy Schermermeer, the silent predator. Billy Schermermeer earned their trust with a badge and a smile. A home health aide turned silent killer. In Texas, he smothered elderly women with pillows, then stole their jewelry, heirlooms, whatever they had left. 2 murders were confirmed, 22 more were suspected. In 2023, he was found dead inside Caulfield unit. No screams, no surveillance footage, just a body in a silent cell. His cellmate never spoke, the prison never explained. But inside, justice has its own language, and sometimes it speaks in silence. 3. Nikolai Radkevich, Russia's Vadim the Bloodsucker. Nikolai Radkevich believed he was cleansing Russia of sin. He called himself righteous. The world called him something else. Vadim the Bloodsucker. In 1909, he roamed St. Petersburg's streets with a twisted sense of purpose, stabbing women he deemed immoral. 3 died by his hand. He was caught, but not truly punished. The court gave him 8 years of hard labor in Siberia, a light sentence for a man who hunted women by night. But prison has no patience for hypocrisy. In 1916, surrounded by thieves and killers, word of his crimes spread through the cold stone walls like smoke. One morning, they turned on him. No blades, no mercy. Just fists and fury in the snow. Radkevich died in silence, beaten by the damned. The very kind of souls he claimed to cleanse. 4. Colin Hatch. A predator predicts his fate. Colin Hatch didn't fear prison. He feared what waited for him inside. Convicted of abducting, raping, and murdering a 7-year-old boy, Hatch was classified as one of the UK's most dangerous child predators. Still, authorities placed him in the general population. Whether by mistake or design, it sealed his fate. On a cold morning in 2011, inside Full Sutton Prison, fellow inmate Damien Fowkes entered Hatch's cell. No alarms, no guards, just the closing click of a steel door. What happened next remains sealed in redacted files. But the result was final. Hatch was strangled to death. Quietly, efficiently. He once said he wouldn't survive prison. He didn't say how fast. 5. Enrique Mati, the vampire of Barcelona. Enrique Mati wasn't just a killer. She was the nightmare parents whispered to their children in early 1900s Barcelona. By day, she posed as a healer. By night, she stalked alleyways, abducting children for rituals soaked in blood and bone. Some she killed, others she kept, offering their remains in the name of dark folklore. When police raided her home in 1912, they didn't just find evidence, they found horror. Small shoes lined in rows, tufts of hair in jars, bone fragments packed like medicine. She was arrested and locked up to await trial, but justice didn't wait for paperwork. In 1913, inmates learned what she'd done. They weren't looking for justice. They wanted to see a monster bleed. The body they left behind wasn't hers anymore. It was justice wearing a human face. 6. Robert Simon, biker turned murderer. Robert Simon wasn't built for peace. He rode with the Warlocks biker gang, enforcing rules with fists, firepower, and fear. He was convicted of slaughtering a family in Mississippi, father, mother, child. It earned him a place on death row, but the cage wasn't his punishment. His cellmate was. In 1999, inside New Jersey State Prison, Simon shared a cell with Ambrose Harris, another killer with his own past and no patience. One night, the silence was broken by the sound of metal and bone. By morning, Simon's body was found crushed, disfigured, and left without a name. Just a cautionary tale in prison gossip. Death row doesn't care who you were. It just waits. And sometimes, it strikes first. 7. Leslie Bailey, justice behind bars. Even in a world filled with killers, some crimes mark you for death. Leslie Bailey was part of a pedophile ring that raped and murdered young boys in the UK. The courts gave him life, but prison has its own version of sentencing. He was held at Whitmore Prison under so-called protection, but word travels fast and his crimes traveled faster. Inmates don't forget, they don't forgive, and they don't wait. In 1993, Bailey was found strangled in his cell. No suspect was ever named, no trial held, but the message was clear. Even monsters have rules, and Bailey broke them. 8. Elifio Filho, vigilante turned victim. Elifio Filho was a self-appointed executioner. He said he was cleansing Brazil's streets, one corpse at a time. With over 60 alleged kills, he became a folk hero to some. But in the prison system, justice isn't a story, it's personal. And Filho had made too many enemies to count. One night, 3 inmates stepped into his cell. One of them, they say, was the brother of a man Filho had executed. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. Fists, blades, bone on concrete. Elifio Filho died like the men he'd killed. Without mercy, without warning. The hunter became the hunted. 9. Carl Williams, the informant's end. Carl Williams once ran Melbourne's underworld with a phone call and a grin. He ordered hits like meals, moved drugs like money, and buried rivals with ease. But when the prison doors shut, he did what crime bosses don't. He talked. Williams became a protected informant. Except in Barwon Prison, protection is just another broken promise. In 2010, while exercising, fellow inmate Matthew Johnson turned a piece of gym equipment into a murder weapon. The stem of a bike became a bludgeon. There was no scream. Only the sick crunch of steel. Betrayal answered in silence. Outside, betrayal buys you deals. Inside, it buys you death. 10. José Antonio Rodriguez Vega, the old lady killer. He preyed on the most defenseless, women in their 70s and 80s living alone, trusting. José Antonio, known as El Mataviejos, raped and murdered at least 16 elderly women in 1980s Spain. He entered their homes like a neighbor. He left them lifeless. The court gave him 440 years. But prison offered something faster. In 2002, he was cornered by inmates who had nothing to lose and no forgiveness to offer. They stabbed him until he stopped moving. No one intervened. No one mourned. Sometimes, monsters don't die in the dark. They die in full view while others watch and call it balance. 11. Roger Kibb, the I-5 strangler. Roger Kibb didn't look like a killer. That's why it worked. Known as the I-5 Strangler, he cruised California highways looking for women stranded, alone, or just too trusting. Then he killed them, efficiently, repeatedly, and without remorse. He was sentenced to life, but not all sentences run their course. In 2021, inside Mule Creek State Prison, Kibbe was found dead, beaten by his cellmate Jason Boudreaux. No rage, no fight, just a body and a quiet confession. Boudreaux called it justice. No jury argued. 12. Donald Harvey, the Angel of Death. Donald Harvey worked in hospitals. His weapon? Trust. He called himself the Angel of Death, claiming mercy. But the truth was colder. 87 victims, maybe more. Some were poisoned, others suffocated. Most had no idea death was coming. He was finally caught and locked away in Ohio, but death came looking for him, too. In 2017, fellow inmate James Elliott attacked Harvey with a metal rod. Over and over, a soft-spoken orderly reduced to blood and ruin. For a man who called his murders kindness, his end was nothing but cruel. 13. James Whitey Bulger, the notorious mob boss. James Whitey Bulger built an empire on fear, money, and betrayal. He ran Boston's Winter Hill Gang with blood-soaked hands and fed tips to the FBI while his rivals disappeared. When the truth caught up, Bulger ran. 16 years later, he was caught, sentenced for 11 murders, and moved through the prison system like a volatile secret. In 2018, within 24 hours of being transferred to USP Hazleton, he was dead. Beaten beyond recognition, eyes gouged, tongue nearly torn out. No warning, just a lock and a sock and a message. Rats die hard. 14. Richard Loeb, the perfect crime gone awry. They weren't driven by desperation, but by arrogance. In 1924, Richard Loeb and Nathan Leopold kidnapped and murdered 14-year-old Bobby Franks, not for money, but for the thrill. They wanted to commit the perfect crime. They were caught, sentenced to life. But inside Stateville Penitentiary, Loeb made one more mistake. He believed he was untouchable. In 1936, fellow inmate James Day attacked him in the showers with a straight razor. Over 50 slashes later, Loeb lay dead, bathed in his own genius. For all his intellect, he never saw the blade coming. 15. Robert Liberty, the system's oversight. Robert Liberty strangled his girlfriend, and the system called him unstable, not evil. He was institutionalized, then declared rehabilitated and released. Weeks later, 2 more were dead. When he was locked up again, the justice system prepared for trial. His cellmate skipped the paperwork. One morning, Liberty was found with a bedsheet wrapped tight around his throat. No struggle, no noise. His sentence ended where it should have begun, with someone finally listening. 16. Gerald Schaefer, the killer cop. Gerald Schaefer patrolled the streets as a Florida deputy, but the badge wasn't his job, it was his disguise. He abducted, tortured, and murdered young women, 2 convictions, over 30 suspected kills. His crimes were chilling, his calm even worse. In 1995, another inmate, Vincent Rivera, decided enough was enough. With a makeshift blade, he stabbed Schaefer in his cell, dozens of times. No mercy, no hesitation. There were no sirens that day, just the sound of blood, breath, and the blade that ended a killer. 18. Albert DSalvo, the Boston Strangler. Albert DSalvo confessed to being the Boston Strangler, the man who terrified an entire city by murdering 13 women. Though never convicted for those murders, he was imprisoned for rape, and he never stopped talking about what he'd done or who might have helped him. In 1973, that talk stopped cold. He was found in his cell, stabbed to death. No one confessed, no weapon was found. Some say it was revenge. Others say it was silence enforced by someone with secrets to keep. Either way, justice came. Quiet. Final. 19. Thorn Christensen. The Thorn Christensen stalked female college students like prey, young, alone, full of trust, just the way he wanted them. He killed at least 4, hiding behind a face that didn't look like a predator. But in prison, appearance means nothing. Reputation is everything. In 1981, inside Folsom Prison, Christensen was shot dead by another inmate. No motive was revealed. No charges were pressed. But inside those walls, crimes against women stick to your skin, and someone decided he didn't deserve to keep breathing. 20. Richard Speck, the nurse killer. In 1966, Richard Speck broke into a Chicago nurses' dormitory and slaughtered 8 women, one by one. His sentence was death, later commuted to life, but prison didn't punish him, it indulged him. Years later, smuggled tapes showed Speck doing drugs, laughing, wearing women's underwear, all from inside his cell. He died of a heart attack in 1991, peacefully, privately. His victims died in terror. He died entertained, and that, for many, is the final insult. Some say prison is justice, others say it's a second chance, but in these cells there was no redemption, only reckoning. Because when you lock monsters in a cage, they don't always rot. Sometimes they devour each other. And this was only half the nightmare. Part 2 reveals 20 more killers who didn't survive their sentences. Subscribe for more stories the system tried to forget. And remember, evil doesn't end with a sentence. Sometimes it ends with silence.